If you guys want to receive a lot of beautiful content, please subscribe to my YouTube page. So please, if you really want to know more about these conversations, you love these chats, and subscribe so you'll get more videos. So now back to this conversation. So we're talking about how the true masculine and the true feminine can really show up. This is something, I will admit, I was at a bar having a beer and I was having a conversation with a friend, and they were like, dude, this is so good. You've got to put it up on Instagram. And I was like, it's a Sunday though. And they're like, dude, if it's on your mind, you got to do it. And it was on my mind. It's on my heart. So I want to bring it out to you guys. It's also been a conversation that's been more in like a sensitive and more obvious in my own life, which is why I want to bring it to you guys. So whatever sex you identify, this is what I'm starting off with. So I want all of you who are out there who may think this is necessarily just a sex description or a gender description to know that it's not necessarily just identified by one. However, I'm talking about from evolutionary dynamics, that the masculine and the feminine have to be able to coexist to be able to perpetuate the species, at least our species. And so that becomes the baseline of how we actually make romantic connection. Whatever your sexual preference is, each one of us has a masculine and feminine energy. But I'm talking about how we can coexist with the best version of the masculine and the feminine to be able to create partnerships. Now, each one of us, as I mentioned, has a bit of a masculine energy and a feminine energy in there. However, based on various aspects of nature and nurture, so these are not based on Yatz's principles or like Yatz's like bullshit that he just woke up and decided to stay. These are based on principles of nature and nurture, evolutionary psychology and developmental psychology. Evolutionary psychology talks about the psychology that comes from the aspect of how we evolve as a species. Developmental psychology talks about how we develop as a little being based on the environment that we're within. So I'm talking about nature and nurture. These two aspects are actually what create us. As we go along in life, there's different portions of each one of them that influence us. Sometimes nature becomes a dominant aspect. For example, as you can see, I'm brown. Brown is delicious. Chocolate is brown. But because of my nature, my resistance to certain conditions, like let's say weather, the cold condition, etc., naturally are much lower. My resistance is much lower than someone who's Caucasian, who was born and raised in this like weather space, so they're naturally able to cope with it more. Now, however, because of my conditioning, which is my nurture aspect, I'm a lot more extroverted because of the society, the collectivism, etc. that I was born in, I was raised in. I was raised in a collectivist society. So dealing with seasonal affective disorder in that way works easier for me because I'm more extroverted. I reach out, create community, connection, blah, blah, blah. So just show you how nature and nurture always show up in different ways in our lives. Now, when we talk about our individual identifications of masculine and feminine, each one of us exhibits a dominant identity of either masculine or feminine. It's difficult to exhibit both of them in an equal amount because the identity of the self likes to take one or the other so that it can create a survival mechanism. Evolution is a survival mechanism. It's the way to procreate a species. It's a way for us to continue our family name. It's a way for us to like procreate and continue the evolution of, the human existence or of animals, etc. So relationships play a part in our exhibiting what is the dominant trait that we have. The reason I'm bringing up this conversation to you today, and you can love me or hate me irrespective, I'm just going to share what I believe, what I've learned, and using my experience, how I can translate it to you. Each one of us, to attract the relationship we really need and deserve, we need to understand two things. One, what is the energy that I'm exhibiting right now? Masculine, feminine, what is it in this space? Two, if I want to have a good, sustained relationship based on the energy that I have or I want to have, what can I look for in a partner? How can I attract it into my life? How can I keep it into my life? How can I encourage it in my life? How can I demand from it in my life? How can I support it in my life? How can I provide for it in my life? So I'm going to give you and speak to you from the example of myself. I identify as a masculine individual. However, I'm very sensitive as a man, and so I have a strong feminine energy. Now, this is where it gets interesting because, when I was raised as a boy, I had, and I'm going to give you this piece of wisdom. Please take your notes and your pens and paper because this is going to really affect what you look for in a relationship. This is going to be so powerful for you to understand your own life and how you show up in a conditioned manner. For a boy developing, for the masculine developing, it is so important to have a female identification as a nurturer. For the masculine, it is very important for a boy or a developing child to grow up in a strong and healthy masculine. He needs to have a nurturing, supportive, capable mother. What happens now is that this boy develops, or this child who identifies in the masculine develops, growing with an internal security of emotions. Very important. Growing with an internal security of emotions, which now teaches this boy or this man who has had the security of emotions because he's had a supportive and a capable mother, it teaches him how to show up for other women. It teaches him how to show up for himself. It teaches him how to be able to stand true when, for example, he's now in a relationship with a woman or the feminine comes into his life. It teaches him not to be victimized. A lot of men who have not grown up with the strength of having like a nurturing mother, what happens is they victimize themselves. And so when women feel like wounded in that particular perspective, or if women come to them with their emotions, these men run away. These men are afraid. These men close down. These men like shrivel up, because for them, they're like, holy shit, this is way too much for me. And the reason they feel like it's way too much for them is because they think they're not capable. They don't have a strong and stable emotional standpoint. These boys in this situation, or these men in this situation, they don't know how to fully hold emotional space for a woman. And so what happens is when a woman needs that emotional space to be held, or the feminine needs it, this masculine tends to blame, shame, or tends to step into a place where it's like, I can't hold space for you. So it starts to run away, be avoidant, because they're wounded and they're shriveling on the inside. Now, contributing to this is also, what is the male role model for this man or this masculine? Most likely the male role model was exactly what this individual is becoming, which is the male role model, the father, was emotionally avoidant, was probably the same way because of his own conditioning. And so it allows it to perpetuate within this boy. And if this boy did not have the strength of the mother to nurture him, he feels, this is so important, this male, this boy feels like when the woman is feeling overwhelmed, when his partner is feeling insecure, he thinks it means something about him, because he doesn't have the strength of security to understand this is probably just an extension of her own wounds. She's working through something. She needs me to be stable. She needs me to be grounded. She needs me to understand that her emotions don't mean that I'm less of a man. And so it's so important for the masculine to be able to develop that and create that internal security so that it can show up for the woman, not want to run away, not want to blame or shame, and not want to make them say that they're too much. The only reason that the man will make a woman feel or say like they're too much, so basically projecting, is because they don't understand the capacity of how to hold space for themselves. They can communicate to a woman in a healthy manner, or to the feminine in a healthy manner, that says, hey, I think you need to understand where your emotions are coming from more, because they may be coming from a wounded place more. I'll hold space for you, but I need you to really work on this and work through it. But if they blame and shame, that's because they're projecting their own insecurity of not knowing where, not having had someone hold space, be nurturing, supportive, and caring for them. Now let's flip the switch. Someone asked about the male, and this is so important because I will be completely honest with you, 90% of my consumer base, 90% of the people who follow me are women, because women naturally are more able to accept that I need help in the emotional space. Men disconnect from it. Why? Because of what I just told you. So let's come to women. It is so important for the girl child to be able to have a strong male role model for what? Think about all the things that a girl child would really need. Safety, security, trust. You need a pillar in your life. And it's so important because this allows the feminine of the girl to flourish. Because the feminine will always know that even if something happens, as a child, you're meant to take risks, you're meant to take chances, you're meant to practice, you're meant to be curious. And especially for the girl child, if she's allowed to flourish, because she has a strong role model, she'll know she'll always be protected. She knows she'll always be taken care of. She knows, quote unquote, that she can step into uncharted waters. She can flow because there's always stability. So important. Flow, if you study the yin and the yang, if you study any of the combinations of like Eastern philosophies where they talk about masculine and feminine, the feminine is always about flow. It's about trust. It's about surrender. And so you can only really surrender when you feel safe, right? This is why women have such a hard time in relationships. This is why the feminine has such a challenging time in relationships, because the safety of the man is also not proved. And so what happens is the women have such a hard time surrendering. Feminine has such a hard time being able to let go, to flow. And so it builds up a hard exterior, an exterior which is a false, like, I'm strong, I'm tough, I'm individual, I can take care of myself, which gives you this false sense of identity, unfortunately, that I don't need anything else to survive. But the feminine is so beautiful, so magical, that when it surrenders, the masculine has no choice but to, like, fall back and flow into the river. But if there is no surrendering, there is no, like, completely just allowing, there is no flowing, then the masculine gets threatened and the feminine gets threatened. So let's go back to this, the feminine expression, right? The girl child. If the girl child does not have, so take two cases. I've worked with so many people. I've had partners who also have not had fathers, who've lost their fathers when they were really young. And it's such a good case study, because almost all women or girls who grew up without a strong role model, they grew up needing to overcompensate with a masculine dominant energy. If you are someone like that, take this second, sit back and just think about it. I may have not had a strong role model, male role model as a girl in my life. What does that mean? You still need to survive, right? You still need to take care of yourself. So your ego starts to say, I need to do the things that I was not able to have when I was younger. So it steps into this place where it has like a very strong, dominant male expression. And so, or masculine expression, sorry. So you start to hyper-perform at work. You start to see productivity as a reason for your like identity or survival. You start to fight and push around in your space of like work or whatever so you can feel strong and secure and safe there. You start to say very strongly you don't need a man. You start to think maybe you don't need to have children or to have that kind of life. And hey, anybody can have all of these discussions. My sister never wants to have kids, but I also study my sister and I know where it comes from. And so in this space, what happens is the feminine now starts to take another expression of masculinity. And so in this space, when it starts to get into relationships, it's so scared to feel the ability to trust and to flow. And so if a woman or a feminine by this aspect has like naturally been so hurt by the element of going through not having a strong masculine element to protect them, then when they get into a relationship with another man, because they refuse to trust, even if the man or the masculine is secure, because they refuse to trust, they keep butting heads. Because they refuse to trust, they doubt. They doubt the man, they doubt his capabilities, they doubt their own, like, you know, what the expression is in the relationship. This is the craziest thing that you may hear. They will always have a substandard sexual experience. You know why? Because for the feminine to have the capacity to have true orgasms, to be able to have like this completely, like, you know, connected mind-body experience, it requires to let go. That's how powerful the feminine is, that it can have multiple orgasms. But the man in that situation, the masculine, cannot. But for the feminine to tap into that, it requires a complete feeling of surrender, which is why for the feminine energy to truly express itself, it needs to be surrounded by trust. It needs to be surrounded by safety. It needs to be surrounded by accountability. It needs to be surrounded by responsibility. So for the feminine and for women who've gone through that place, who've like may not have had a strong role model, a lot of them develop with this tough identity of themselves subconsciously. They may even speak to them like, you know, out loud and not say these things. But I've met so many women in my life who are so innately, like, you can see the beauty that lies within them, but you can also see this tough shell that's been built around them by their ego saying, I need to survive, so I have to be like this. Unfortunately, in the North American society, because of the individualism that's developed here, that's a very strong cultural norm. Take a trip for yourself, travel around the world, go to Mexico, Latin America, go to India, go to the East. You'll see how much the feminine energy flourishes in those countries just because of the cultural dynamic and the way it shifts. So in this place, because individualism is strongly supported, the female feels also, the feminine feels like I have to be an individual to survive. And that's such an unfortunate thing, because as a species, we cannot survive as individuals. The biggest punishment in jail or in prison is social isolation. You cannot be able to, you can't procreate if you just procreate by yourself. It's not possible. We're not amoeba. So amoeba go through a process of mitosis where they can just like split. We can't actually do that. And so we need to be able to fit into this system. So the next question becomes, okay, yeah, you've given us this stuff. How can we be able to fit into this space where I can fall into more of my feminine or I can fall into more of my masculine? Now, as a man, I'll go first and I'll speak to that because that's the easiest for me to be able to relate to. As a man, I was raised with a father who is emotionally absent, right? Now, this is classic male. And so I should have grown up more avoidant because that's naturally the system of where I grow. But most avoidance, believe it or not, will have a mother who's more emotionally present. And so if the mother is more emotionally present, the boy starts to feel in his system that, okay, I have all the emotions. I need to run away from the system of like what I'm getting out from my parent and what's like, coming at me. And so at that point, he starts to disconnect. Now, I had an emotionally absent mother as well. So I had two parents who were alive. So I had no real like physical excuse for them not showing up. They were alive, they were at home with me, but they were both provider parents. So my mother, who was supposed to be a nurturer, withdrew emotions from me. And so because I had a mother who was not a nurturer, who couldn't stand true and wasn't available, I unconsciously started to chase it. And so I started to develop more of a feminine expression because emotions were the most important thing to me because I never had them. So when I got into relationships, especially when I was younger, I got into this whole Peter Pan stage, right? I got into the whole Peter Pan aspect where wherever I would get deep emotions, I would fly with it. And so I would get them from like women who would show up, and when they leave, I'd go to another place. And I'd just fly with the emotions, I'd fly with the journey. But as a man, I was not providing what? Safety, security, groundingness, stability, none of that. And I had no real good idea on how to do it either. So none of my relationships, all the women in my relationships, even though they loved me because of the emotional intensity I was able to provide, none of them truly felt safe. I'm saying this with complete honesty and truth. And so none of them were able to allow their true feminine to come out completely, because there has to be that element of when you surrender to something, what do you need to know? That you can trust it, right? Why else would you surrender to something that's dangerous? No, you'd be like, no, I don't want to come here. But when you trust something so blindly, you put on a blindfold, you put your hands behind you, you put your hands up and you're like, I'll do it. I'll go with it. That's the masculine's responsibility.